All right, this is the third part of the 4 sections in this sermon series called Mercy Me. And the first one, the first point is the Prophecies of Mercy. The second point, the Personification of Mercy in the person of Jesus Christ. The third point is the prescription of mercy. The fourth point is the practice of mercy. Now, I have a feeling those last 3 points, personification, prescription, and practice, will be able to get done one message each. But this Prophecies of Mercy has so many passages in the Old Testament that predicted the time when Christ would come and give mercy to his people, forgive their sins. So I thought it was going to take one time. And then I thought for sure it'll only take 2. So now it's 3. And if it takes more than 3, we're just not going to do it. Okay, so anyway, this is the Prophecies of Mercy, part 3. And what we're going to do is we're going to start in Hosea. I skipped a couple verses in Jeremiah, but that's okay. You can, go through Jeremiah, look at chapter 23 and chapters 30 and 31 if you want to take a peek at the Prophecies of Mercy in Jeremiah. So we're going to start with Hosea, chapter 2, verse 23. More farm language here. I will sow her unto me in the earth, and I will have mercy upon her that had not obtained mercy. And I will say to them which were not my people, you are my people. And they shall say, you are my God. Now, just a brief bit of history regarding this statement of, you are not my people. What happened with Israel, and we're talking about the northern kingdom. Remember, we talked about Israel as a whole nation was divided up in the middle after Solomon. It used to be a whole nation. You had Saul, and then you had David, and then you had Solomon. But then after Solomon, what happened was one guy by the name of Jeroboam took over the northern kingdom of Israel and Samaria. Samaria was the capital of Israel, and Jerusalem was the capital of Judah on the bottom. So a little bit of a geography lesson there. And Rehoboam, who was the son of Solomon, took over the southern kingdom. And throughout their history, there were problems. Well, there came a point in time where God said to Israel, that's it, you guys are gone. And they were taken captive by Assyria. And what happened with them is very, very important. What happened with the Israelites is they began to mingle with the Gentiles. And they began to breed with the Gentiles. And they became regarded as what by the Jews? It's the D word. Dogs. Do you remember the Samaritan woman? And she was confronted with Jesus. And they were having a discussion about food and salvation and so forth. And Jesus said to her, what are you doing talking with me? And inviting blessing from me. Jesus said that to her. And she said she was a Samaritan woman, okay, so which meant she was half Gentile, half Jew. And a lot of people have problems with people who are half anything in addition to white. That's my parents even grew up that way. And they were very opposed to any kind of interracial marriage or anything like that. And you got to know that the Jews were very, very opposed to it. And it was actually a part of God's command in the Old Testament that if you were a part of that national group of people that were related to Abraham, you were not to mingle with the Gentiles, the pagans. In fact, there was a story in Nehemiah, remember that, Nehemiah, where the priests started marrying Gentiles. And so Nehemiah, who's just this, forceful prophet, I mean, he took things, he grabbed the bull by the horn, so to speak. This guy sees these priests and finds out that they've been getting involved with these Gentile women. And it says Nehemiah went up and started slugging them. And it said he started pulling their beard hair out. Isn't that crazy? It's like, ease up, buddy. But he was angry because he saw that they had gone against God's command. And that was true under the Old Testament. But in the New Testament, what happens is Jesus comes on the scene, pays the penalty for sin, breaks down the middle wall of partition between Jew and Gentile, so that of the two, they're one new man. They are in Christ. And he does say, don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And what's interesting is if you look at the context of 2 Corinthians where he says that, he's really saying, don't get involved with the Pharisees anymore, because that was the problem, is they kept wanting to go back to their old friends within the Pharisaic system, the Jewish system, and it was an apostate. That is a false Jewish system. They weren't trusting in the God of the Bible, even though they had, they had been circumcised and they were descendants of Abraham. But they had stopped trusting in God the moment that they put their trust in their works. God says that's a false system. It's a false system of justification. You can't justify yourself by your works. So they were a false religion, just as they are today. It is a false religion because it teaches salvation by works, and God's opposed to that. So this issue, though, of mingling was a problem. And this lady, when she's confronted with Jesus, she says, yes, but don't the dogs even get the crumbs? And Jesus regarded her faith. And then, of course, there was the woman at the well who also was a Samaritan. And suddenly we begin to see that God is in the business now of saving Gentiles. As far as the Jews were concerned, the Israelites had become Gentiles. In fact, they were worse in the mind of a Jew. Hey, at least a Gentile is just a pure-blooded Gentile. But you're a Jew, you were an Israelite, and you married or got involved with Gentiles. You're sick, you're a dog, you're worse. So the Jews had no dealings with Samaritans at the time of Christ. So it's very important. So God says there's going to come a time here where those people who were not my people will be called the people of God. And so it happened first with those Israelites who mingled with the Gentiles, insomuch that they were called Gentiles. And then finally you would get to the place where you're in the New Testament and you have the real Gentiles, and they were not regarded by the Jews at all. In fact, they were frowned upon, and the Jews could not figure out why salvation through the message of Paul was coming to the Gentiles. People like you and me, non-Jews. And so Hosea says, I will say to them which were not my people, you are my people. And they shall say, you are my God. Now look at the cross-reference in 1 Peter chapter 2. Peter, remember the scene in Peter in the book of Acts where Peter sees this sheet coming down from heaven. And in this sheet were all sorts of bugs. Remember that? Bugs and creeping things. And God says, eat them. And Peter says, no, I'm not going to eat any unclean thing. And God says, don't call unclean what I have cleansed. He was referring to the Gentiles. And if you look in the Old Testament system, God said there were certain things you cannot eat. And what God was saying is, don't mix with the Gentiles under the Old Covenant system. So whether it was shellfish or whether it was pigs or whatever, God was saying those represent the Gentiles. Have no dealings with the Gentiles. But there's going to come a time where I will clean the Gentiles. And so the time had come. Jesus had paid the penalty on the cross for the Gentiles. And God tells Peter, don't eat, or go ahead and eat all that. And Peter says, no, I don't want to eat what is unclean. And God says, you're calling the Gentiles unclean. I've cleansed them. You now can fellowship with them. Isn't that beautiful? God breaks down the barrier through Jesus Christ.